I tell you what they should do. They should combine the two jobs. Make it one job, cop/garbage man.
Seinfeld is not a sitcom. Not really. It's a 9-year argument that people with no redeeming qualities, no growth, and no intention of learning from their mistakes are the most interesting people on television, and that nothing happening to them is the most compelling story you can tell. And this show is hiding things that even people who've seen every episode twice have never stopped to look for. A character who appears in almost every scene of almost every episode, hiding in plain sight in the background of Jerry's apartment. A co-creator whose voice runs through 9 seasons of a show where his face almost never appears on screen. And an episode that the network hated, the writer was convinced would get him fired, and which went on to win the Emmy for Outstanding Writing in a Comedy Series, for a script that never once says the word it's about. These are 20 weird facts about Seinfeld. Number 20. The pilot was rated weak by NBC Research, and NBC still passed on it. When the pilot episode, then called The Seinfeld Chronicles, was screened to 24 NBC executives in Burbank in early 1989, the room did not explode with applause the way it had for The Cosby Show or The Golden Girls. It got laughs, people seemed to like it, but NBC Entertainment President Brandon Tartikoff, himself a Jewish man from New York, which makes this particularly cutting, looked at the pilot and said, "Too New York, too Jewish." The show was sent to NBC's viewer research department and came back rated as weak, and not just ordinarily weak. An NBC executive later recalled, "This was a weak week." That rating was enough to keep the show off the 1989 to 90 primetime schedule entirely. It aired the pilot on July 5, 1989, finished second in its time slot against a CBS cop drama, and was quietly shelved. One NBC executive, Warren Littlefield, kept fighting for it internally, and the show returned in May 1990 with a new character, Elaine, added to fix what research said was missing. The show that research called a weak week went on to become the most successful sitcom in the history of television syndication. Number 19. Superman is hidden in almost every episode, and nobody planned it that way. There's a popular claim that Superman appears in every single episode of Seinfeld. A figurine on the shelf, a magnet on the fridge, a line of dialogue, a reference buried in a scene. The actual count is more complicated than that, but the phenomenon is real. A Superman figurine sits on Jerry's bookshelf throughout the series. A Superman magnet appears on his refrigerator. Characters casually name-drop him in conversation. 2 entire episodes are built around Superman mythology. The reason for all of this is that both Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David were genuinely obsessed with Superman, and that obsession leaked into the show organically rather than by design. In a Reddit AMA, Jerry explained it directly. Larry David and I discovered that we were both obsessed with Superman and admired him, and also found him very funny at the same time, so that is why he came up a lot. Writer Peter Melman confirmed there was never a directive from the writer's room to include him. He just magically appeared early in the series and evolved into a go-to guy for humor. The characters whose whole lives revolve around lying, cheating, and getting their own way kept referencing the one fictional figure devoted to truth, justice, and the American way. The joke was always implicit. Number 18. Kramer was called Kessler in the pilot, and the real Kramer charged $1,000 for his name. Larry David based the character of Kramer on his real-life neighbor, Kenny Kramer, who lived across the hall from him at Manhattan Plaza in Midtown Manhattan. The real Kramer used to wander into David's apartment, help himself to the food in the fridge, and pitch increasingly elaborate get-rich-quick schemes, essentially the character as written. When David came to name the fictional version, he initially called him Kessler because he wasn't sure Kenny would appreciate being parodied on national television. He was right to be cautious. Kenny Kramer petitioned to play himself on the show, was turned down, and eventually settled for a payment of $1,000 in exchange for the use of his name. He signed the deal because the cast all agreed that Kessler didn't sound right and Kramer was a much better fit. The $1,000 is one of the worst financial decisions in the history of licensing. The real Kenny Kramer later launched a New York City tour bus business, the Kramer reality tour, taking paying tourists to the real-life locations from the show, which was itself the kind of scheme the fictional Kramer would have invented. Number 17. Larry David carried the idea for the contest in a notebook for 2 years, then threatened to quit if NBC killed it. The contest, the season 4 episode in which Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer hold a competition to see who can go the longest without masturbating, without the word masturbation ever appearing in the script, is now widely considered one of the greatest single episodes of television comedy ever made. Larry David had been carrying the idea in a notebook for 2 years before he felt confident enough to pitch it, convinced it was too strange and too explicit for a network sitcom. When he finally did pitch it and it was approved for production, David became certain that NBC would step in and kill the episode before it could air. He told the Los Angeles Times in 1995, "That particular show I was very worried about, and in my mind, I thought that I would quit if they wouldn't let us do it." NBC did not kill it. The episode aired, the word was never used, the Emmy for Outstanding Writing in a Comedy Series was won, and the phrase, "master of my domain," entered the language. David's readiness to resign over a script about something that could only be referred to obliquely is itself the most Seinfeld thing that ever happened. Number 16. George Costanza has a real-life namesake who filed a $100 million lawsuit. George Costanza is widely understood to be based on Larry David, an exaggerated version of David's most anxious, neurotic, self-defeating qualities. What is less known is that the name itself came from a real person, a man named Mike Costanza, who was Jerry Seinfeld's friend from college. Mike Costanza was not particularly involved in the creation of the character, and he was not happy when the show became a national phenomenon. In 1998, the year the show ended, Mike Costanza filed a $100 million lawsuit against Jerry Seinfeld and the show's producers, claiming that the character had ruined his reputation and caused him emotional distress. The judge dismissed the case, ruling that the statute of limitations had run out because the first episode had aired 9 years earlier, in 1989. A man whose name was borrowed for one of the most beloved comic characters in television history sued for $100 million and lost on a technicality. He also published a book about his experience called The Real Seinfeld, as told by the real Costanza. It sold modestly. Number 15. Larry David's voice is all over the show, including as George Steinbrenner. Larry David left Seinfeld as showrunner after season 7, but his voice literally never left. Throughout the series, David provided uncredited voiceover cameos for a surprising number of characters. He voiced George Steinbrenner, the faceless, bellowing Yankees boss who appears frequently in George's storylines, for the entirety of the show's run. He also voiced Newman in Newman's debut episode, though that performance was later re-recorded by Wayne Knight for syndication. Beyond voiceovers, David appears on-screen in the show several times without credit, as Frank Costanza's caped lawyer, as a cashier who returns a lipstick-marked $20 bill to George, as a sci-fi movie actor, and as a background figure when Kramer is arrested in season 4. Even after David formally left, the writers worked his name into a Boca Breeze newsletter that appeared on screen, describing his difficulties on the golf course. The man whose face and voice shaped the entire show for 7 years is hiding in it at almost every level, usually without acknowledgement. Number 14. Larry David enforced a no-hugging, no-learning rule and made it stick across 9 seasons. Most sitcoms of the 1990s operated on a premise that character growth was the point. By the end of each episode, someone had learned something, someone had hugged someone else, and the status quo was restored with slightly more warmth than it had started. Seinfeld was built on the explicit rejection of that model. Larry David instituted what became known internally as the no-hugging, no-learning rule, a directive that the 4 main characters should never grow, never improve, never genuinely connect, and never take emotional lessons from whatever absurd situation they had just been through. The rule held across 9 seasons and 180 episodes, and it was enforced at the writing level. Any script that moved a character toward warmth or development was flagged and revised. The series finale is the most direct expression of the rule. Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer are imprisoned for their failure to intervene during a carjacking and spend their last moments on screen having the same petty, circular conversations they were having in the pilot. They learned nothing. They never hugged. The rule held. Number 13. Elaine wasn't in the original pilot. She was written in to fix a research problem. The original pilot episode of the Seinfeld Chronicles has no Elaine Bennis. The core of the show was Jerry and George, with a female character named Claire, a waitress at the diner, written as a potential recurring presence. After the pilot aired and research came back, NBC noted that the show felt too male, too insular, and needed a stronger female presence to broaden its appeal. Claire was considered abrasive, and the producers weren't keen on developing her further, so a new character was created. Julia Louis-Dreyfus was cast as Elaine Bennis, Jerry's ex-girlfriend, and the character was introduced in the first episode of Season 2. Louis-Dreyfus has said in interviews that she was initially uncertain about joining a show that had already defined its tone without her. What the research intervention ended up doing, accidentally, was giving the show one of its best characters, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus one of the defining roles of her career. The female lead who saved the show from being too male was added because test audiences said it was too male. Number 12. Kramer's entrance got so much applause that producers had to put a time limit on it. Michael Richards' Kramer is one of the most physically committed performances in the history of American sitcoms. The entrances alone, the sliding burst through Jerry's door, the immediate physicality, the way Richards fills a room before he said a word, generated studio audience responses so sustained that they were disrupting the pacing of scenes. Actors were waiting, jokes were landing late, the laughter wasn't dying down quickly enough for the dialogue to continue. The problem became significant enough that showrunners instructed studio audiences to limit their applause when Richards entered a scene. That instruction, to stop clapping for a man who hadn't done anything yet, had to be given because the audiences couldn't help themselves. Richards, meanwhile, was known off-camera as one of the most serious and methodical performers on the set, almost the polar opposite of the chaotic energy he projected on screen. He requested that his fellow cast members not laugh during scenes, as it disrupted his performance. The most chaotic character on the show was performed by the most controlled actor on it. Number 11. The real soup Nazi permanently banned Jerry Seinfeld from his soup kitchen. The soup Nazi, the imperious soup vendor who enforces a precise ordering ritual on his customers under threat of banishment, was based on a real person named Al Yagana, who ran a soup kitchen in Manhattan called Soup Kitchen International. Yagana's soups were genuinely extraordinary, and his demanding manner with customers was genuinely real. The Seinfeld writers researched him, named the episode after him, and turned his operation into one of the most quoted moments in the show's run. Al Yagana did not take it well. He found the portrayal demeaning, objected strongly to being nicknamed the Soup Nazi, and made it permanently known that Jerry Seinfeld was no longer welcome at his establishment. The man whose eccentricities made him famous, whose soup business became a franchise partly because of the exposure, and whose manner of operating was reproduced essentially verbatim on the most-watched sitcom of the decade, banned the show's star from his restaurant for life. The real Soup Nazi's response to becoming the Soup Nazi was, "No soup for you." Number 10. Julia Louis-Dreyfus was pregnant during Season 3, and the crew hid it behind furniture. During the filming of Seinfeld's third season, Julia Louis-Dreyfus was pregnant in real life, and the production had to conceal the pregnancy throughout the latter half of the season because the Elaine character was not written as pregnant. The solution was an ongoing logistical exercise in strategic furniture placement. Elaine is consistently positioned behind counters, tables, laundry baskets, and other objects at waist level throughout those episodes, and her costumes are cut to minimize visibility. When Seinfeld learned about the pregnancy, he suggested to the writers that the show might incorporate it by writing that Elaine had become overweight. Louis-Dreyfus was upset by the suggestion to the point of tears. She later admitted in retrospect that it would have been a great idea, and that she thought it would have been hilarious. The suggestion that would have been funny that she initially cried about was not used. And instead, for the back half of Season 3, Elaine Bennis had the most carefully arranged furniture in any apartment on television. Number 9. Lawrence Tierney was so frightening on set that nobody wanted to work with him again. Lawrence Tierney was cast as Elaine's father in the Season 2 episode The Jacket, and the idea was that he would be a recurring character, a menacing, imposing figure who would serve as a comic counterweight to Elaine's lightness. Tierney was a legendary character actor known for playing exactly that kind of role, and his casting seemed ideal. On set, Tierney was genuinely terrifying. He was seen walking around with a butcher knife that he had apparently taken from the props on the set, and at one point, he pretended to stab Jerry Seinfeld with it. Jason Alexander later described both him and Jerry as genuinely intimidated. After filming the episode, the decision was made quietly and without announcement. No one wanted to invite Tierney back. Elaine's father disappeared from the show without explanation. The character written as a recurring presence appeared in one episode and was never mentioned again. because the actor who played him frightened the entire cast too much to continue. The knives from the set were presumably counted after he left. Number 8. Jason Alexander threatened to quit because George was left out of an episode. In the Season 2 episode The Pen, Jerry travels to Florida to visit his parents, and the entire episode centers on Jerry and Elaine, with no George, no Kramer, and no New York. Jason Alexander was not in the episode at all, and his reaction when he found out was not subtle. Alexander threatened to quit the show if it happened again. He made clear that he expected George to be present in every episode at a level equivalent to the other 3 lead characters, and that an episode built entirely around Jerry and Elaine without him was not acceptable. The producers took the note seriously enough that George appeared in every subsequent episode of the series. From The Pen onwards, the show never again removed one of its 4 leads from an entire episode. George Costanza's most successful act of self-assertion was the one that happened off-screen, in a conversation nobody heard, about an episode that most people have forgotten. Number 7. Kramer wore the same pair of Doc Marten boots for all 9 seasons, only 2 pairs total. Kramer's wardrobe across 9 seasons is one of the most distinctive costume achievements in television. The wide-collared shirts, the high-waisted trousers, the oversized blazers that belong to no discernible decade. Within all of that visual noise, there is one consistent, almost invisible element running through every single episode. Michael Richards wore the same pair of Doc Marten boots throughout the entire series. The production used only 2 pairs of those boots across all 9 seasons and 180 episodes. Given the amount of physical comedy Richards performed, the slides, the stumbles, the lurches, the full-body commitments to every scene, 2 pairs of boots lasting 9 years represents either extraordinary durability or extraordinary care. The most chaotic character on the show wore the same shoes the entire time. Nobody was meant to notice. Almost nobody did. Number 6. The Chinese restaurant episode was pitched to NBC as an entire episode of nothing, and NBC hated it. The Chinese Restaurant, Season 2, Episode 11, is an episode with no B-plot, no cutaways, no time jumps, and no resolution. Jerry, George, and Elaine stand in a restaurant waiting for a table for 22 minutes. Nobody gets a table. The episode ends. It is one of the most formally radical things a network sitcom had done to that point. NBC hated it. According to Larry David, the network executives couldn't understand what the episode was supposed to be. There was no story, no forward motion, no payoff. What they were being asked to air was 22 minutes of people waiting. David insisted it was entirely in keeping with the spirit of the show and refused to alter it, and the episode aired to strong ratings and critical recognition that it represented something genuinely new. It is now cited in television studies courses as an example of single-location, real-time storytelling in comedy. NBC, having hated it, renewed the show. If you like the video so far, please like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Number 5. Susan Ross was killed off because the cast couldn't figure out how to act alongside her. Susan Ross, George's fiancée across seasons 4 and 7, dies by licking toxic envelopes for her wedding invitations in the season 7 finale. It is one of the show's most abruptly dark moments, and George's reaction, which is relief rather than grief, is one of the most character-defining scenes in the series. The decision to kill her was not primarily a creative one. Jason Alexander later explained that he simply couldn't figure out how to play off actress Heidi Swedberg, and that their comic instincts were always misfiring in scenes together. Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Jerry Seinfeld had similar experiences. Alexander took to Twitter after the story became public to clarify that there was no personal animosity toward Swedberg. The incompatibility was purely a matter of comic timing and chemistry. The writing staff, aware of the problem and unable to resolve it, killed the character with toxic envelopes. George Costanza's fiancée died because the cast couldn't find a rhythm with the actress playing her, and the solution that made the most narrative sense was also the one that freed everyone from the problem. Number 4. The original sets were kept in cold storage for over a decade, and the Monk's Cafe door survived. When Seinfeld finished its run in 1998, the production sets, Jerry's apartment, the Monk's Cafe booths, the countertops, the door, were packaged up and placed into cold storage at Warner Brothers, where they remained for more than a decade. When Larry David staged a Seinfeld reunion for Curb Your Enthusiasm in 2009, the sets were pulled out and reassembled. The original booths, the Monk's door, and Jerry's kitchen countertop were all intact. One significant piece was missing: Jerry's entire front wall, which Seinfeld himself had taken home after filming Wrapped. Wayne Knight, who played Newman, noted that the door on the reconstructed set looked almost perfect. But almost. The wall that millions of viewers had watched Kramer burst through for 9 years was, by 2009, in Jerry Seinfeld's personal possession. The most famous entrance in sitcom history leads to a wall that currently belongs to the man who watched it happen from the other side. Number 3. George Costanza's name came from Jerry Seinfeld's real friend, who also shared his life. George Costanza is described by Larry David as a heavily exaggerated version of himself. His anxieties, his self-defeating instincts, his professional mediocrity, his relationship with his parents. But the name came from somewhere else entirely. George Costanza is named after a real person, Mike Costanza, a friend of Jerry Seinfeld's from Queens College, who became friends with Jerry in the 1970s. The character is therefore a composite, David's psychological profile wearing Seinfeld's friend's name. Mike Costanza had virtually nothing to do with the fictional version, and he found the association damaging enough to file a $100 million lawsuit about it, which we already covered. But the Easter egg is in the construction of the character itself. The most famous fictional neurotic in television comedy is named after a real person who is now legally on the record as finding that unwelcome. Number 2. The contest was based on a real bet that Larry David had with his friends, and he won. The contest episode is not a hypothetical scenario invented for television. Larry David had actually held a real version of this competition with a group of friends in his personal life, years before the show. The mechanics of the bet, the social dynamic of the contest, and the general trajectory of how it played out were drawn from lived experience. David won the real version. In the fictional version, George wins, until the series finale in season 9, when George confesses that he had been lying and that Jerry was actually the true winner all along. David, who had left the show by season 9 but returned to write the finale, apparently decided that his own proxy in the fictional world should not share the distinction he held in real life. The man who won the real contest wrote the show's most famous fictional version of it, based it on himself, gave the win to someone else, and then, in the finale, which he also wrote, took it away from that person too. Number 1. Seinfeld became the most successful syndication deal in the history of television. By the time Seinfeld ended in 1998, it had been the #1 rated show in America for most of its final 3 seasons. The syndication business, the selling of rerun rights to networks and local stations, is where the real long-term money in television lives, and Seinfeld's entry into syndication was unlike anything the industry had seen before. By 2013, Seinfeld had become the most successful show in syndication history. Networks buy reruns in packages sold in cycles, and Seinfeld was the first show in history to reach a 5th syndication cycle, taking its rerun sales through 2017, nearly 20 years after its finale. The show that NBC Research called a weak week, that Brandon Tartikoff said was too New York and too Jewish, that aired its pilot on July 5, 1989, in second place behind a CBS cop drama, ended its run as the highest-grossing piece of television content ever put into rerun distribution. The research department's weak week is still in syndication. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe, and comment what you want to see next.